In December 1964, a photographer by the name of Robert Le Serrec was on holiday with his family at Hook Island in Queensland, Australia. While on this holiday, he would take a picture that would become one of the most infamous images of an alleged cryptid. This image depicted a creature that would become known as the Hook Island Monster. The story begins on December 12, 1964 at Hook Island, Queensland, Australia. Photographer Robert Le Serrec was there on holiday with his family and his friend Hank de Jong. Le Serrec and his family had recently bought a motorboat and was planning to spend a few months on Hook Island. So that day on December 12th, they were crossing Stonehaven Bay when Le Serrec's wife suddenly spotted something strange on the lagoon floor. As they took a closer look, they could see that this object appeared to be a huge tadpole-like creature, which was possibly about 30 feet or 9 meters long. The group immediately began taking pictures of this creature and slowly moved towards it. Eventually, Le Serrec and de Jong had summoned enough courage to jump into the water with the intention of filming this creature. The creature didn't move, so they suspected that it could possibly be dead. As they got closer to the creature and began filming, the creature suddenly opened its mouth and started moving towards the two men. This terrified them so much that they rushed back to the boat. By the time they had gotten back onto the boat, the creature had vanished. Le Serrec and the others would later report that they saw a wound on the right side of this creature, and they speculated that maybe this creature was wounded by a ship's propeller, either in open or deeper water, and it had decided to take refuge in the shallow lagoon to recover and rest. Le Serrec would also state that the creature had pale eyes with slit-shaped pupils that sat on the top of its head. From what he could tell, it didn't have any fins or spines of any kind, and when it opened its mouth, it was completely white, but the man couldn't see any teeth. And this creature was supposedly completely black in color and had very smooth skin. He also claimed that the creature appeared much bigger once they got closer to it. So it went from like 30 feet to somewhere around 75 to 80 feet. As with any other sighting of an alleged cryptid, there has been a lot of debate regarding the authenticity of the Hook Island monster. For instance, there's a lot of details that Le Serrec claimed about this creature that many have problems with, one such being the position of the eyes. Many skeptics say that the eyes being located on the top of the head make this very suspicious, as most vertebrates have their eyes either closer to the snout or on this side of the head, and not on the top of the head. That's a small detail. I mean, there's so many creatures in the oceans, and maybe some of them have their eyes on the top of their head. Some have tried to figure out what type of creature it could possibly have been. For instance, it's been suggested that this creature could have been a giant swamp eel. Swamp eels are freshwater eel-like fish that live mainly in the tropics and subtropics, most commonly in marshes, ponds, and places that are very damp. These animals are capable of breathing air. And if the water source happens to dry up, they bury themselves in the mud instead. They are long and slender, and they lack pectoral or pelvic fins. They also lack scales and a swim bladder. While the swamp eel might seem like the ideal candidate for the Hook Island monster, the swamp eel only ranges from about 20 to 70 centimeters or 8 to 28 inches in length. And they're also not tadpole-shaped. Some believers have said that maybe a giant relative of the swamp eel might live somewhere in the deep ocean, and this is what they saw. Of course, other animals have also been suggested, such as giant salamanders. And some have even suggested that maybe the Hook Island monster wasn't an animal, but rather a school of fish. And like with any other cryptid, it's been accused of being a hoax. Some skeptics say that the Hook Island monster was faked using plastic bags that were weighed down with sand. And some have even said that the images must have been doctored somehow. Now, whenever we talk about manipulating images or editing photos, most people think of Photoshop. But photo retouching have been around almost as long as the art of photography itself. Before the days of software such as Photoshop, the editing took place on the photo negative, and how they edited differed. Some would scrape the film with knives, others would draw or paint on top of it, and others would paste multiple negatives together to create a single print. This meant that some photographers would edit their photos to create illusions. Others would use these techniques to make money. One such person was William H. Mumler, who became the inventor of spirit photography, after he figured out how to produce images with double exposure. For instance, the ghost photo of Abraham Lincoln is one such photo. Another example is the Soviet Union, which is notorious for editing their images during the Cold War. In fact, I've already covered one such story on this channel. The point here is that it's very possible for Le Serrec to have faked the images, even in the 1960s. The final argument against these images is that Le Serrec apparently isn't the most trustworthy person to begin with. In the book In the Wake of Sea Serpents from 1968, the author writes that Le Serrec had left unpaid creditors in France. And the author notes that this does not exactly make him seem very trustworthy. And supposedly in 1959, Robert Le Serrec had allegedly tried to get a group together on an expedition that would prove financially fruitful and that regarded some kind of sea serpent. Le Serrec's credibility would also be called into question in another book, where it was stated that he was wanted by Interpol. Sea cryptids are probably my favorite type of cryptid, simply because of how vast and terrifying the ocean is. New creatures living in the depths of the ocean are discovered all the time, and there's still so much that we don't know. So with that in mind, it would be easy to imagine that a monster-like creature could live down there and would randomly appear on the surface. In fact, it kind of seems very plausible if you consider things like deep-sea gigantism, or creatures like the oarfish, which lives deep underwater and is only seen when it comes to the surface, either wounded or dying. So what does that mean for the supposed Hook Island monster? From what I could gather, most seem to agree that this cryptid was nothing but a hoax, but there are a lot of people who do believe that this was a real creature. What do you guys think?